And we're back here at Boom and Bust having a good discussion with Elaine Dezenski. She is at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Elaine, please continue your point on where this is going before the break.
Thanks so much. So I think one consideration, particularly for new legislation coming, is the expansion of the geographic remit. So right now, most of the activity is really contemplated for China. But that is likely to expand if we see that there are threats coming from other regimes, potentially authoritarian regimes, where we feel that private capital is at risk. So I think it's likely that that geographic expansion will occur, maybe not in the first instance, because China is certainly the focus and where most of the risk is at the moment. But that will be important to factor in, particularly from a business perspective. If businesses are thinking about where that capital might go if it's not going to China, so very important to consider.
So I mentioned off the top, and maybe erroneously, that it might encompass Iran, but it sounds like because there's really no American private sector involvement in the Iranian economy, that wouldn't be a target on this EO right now.
Yeah, I think that's right. Iran is probably not the target. A couple of years ago, we might have thought Russia would be a target. I'm not so sure that's the case because there's been so much pivoting out. But we'll have to see how that plays out. The other aspect that is quite important to the conversation is what other allies and partners are doing in this space.
Yes.
So we know that the UK is moving forward with their discussion on something similar. The EU has talked about implementing a mechanism. Germany has talked about that. And this is absolutely critical because even if we're successful with aligning U.S. capital, there's still the potential that there's a hole in this framework, if you will, if it's happening through other democracies and other points of investment. So we really need to think about that process. How do we bring our allies and partners around on this focus and strategy? And how do we get ahead of that curve?
Now, do you think that they're doing so at the behest of the U.S. administration, or are they doing this independently of that?
I think it's a combination. So they're certainly watching in terms of what the U.S. is putting in place around its response to China and that strategic competition. But I think countries like Germany and the UK recognize that they have their own set of vulnerabilities, particularly Germany, where they have a tremendous amount of trade and supply chain integration with China, big operations, German companies with massive footprints in China. So there is a dependency question there and a question around capital flow that I think is quite critical for them.
Now, obviously, we talked a little bit about corporate leadership. Can they be, I mean, they're reacting to this, but they are obviously a necessary partner in this, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So a very important point, because the success of this in terms of an implementation process and a mechanism that is effective does rely on some level of public-private engagement around the conversation. So businesses really need to think about how this new requirement is going to impact their operations. But we also need a good feedback loop between the regulators and those who are subject to the requirements, and that does have to happen at the highest levels of leadership because this is a pretty serious set of national security concerns that are driving this conversation. In some ways, it's a positive step that this is moving forward. There have been concerns coming from the investor community, but not to the point where it's stopping the rulemaking or causing Congress to consider dropping legislation. I don't think that's the case. So there is a certain sense of alignment, I think, that capital needs to go in the right places. We're not talking about all capital. We're talking about that sliver that really has national security implications.
So we got about 30 seconds left before the next break, but it sounds like the corporate leadership is taking this seriously because it is a national security issue.
I think that's right. There is a growing conversation around alignment of capital and what that means for protecting democracy, what it means for national security, economic resilience. We really can't disassociate private capital flow from the broader geopolitical risks that we're facing,
Sure.
particularly with China.